Tonight will be a little bit different than part one and part two because I want to study together one of the central stories of Sefer Yehoshua a little bit more closely than the first few topics that we've touched on. My instinct is, or maybe it's just a personal projection, that I think this story is a very important piece of Sefer Yehoshua, but not the most familiar. So I think the basics of the Yericho story, which we've talked about, I think people know the basics of the story with Achan, Yehoshua, and the Malach. These are kind of more familiar to us. And I think in trying to understand Yehoshua more broadly, this is a very important topic, which is why it appears right in the middle of the Sefer in Perek Tes and in Perek Yud. So tonight we're going to look primarily at Perek Tes. We're going to study it together. We're going to fast forward through a little bit of the 10th Perek of Yehoshua as well, and then we're going to put it into context with some of the halachos and experiences that Moshe has in Sefer Devarim, and some of the very important reflections on this topic from the Rishonim, from the Rambam and the Ramban that you have in the handout if you're here in person, and if not, I will share my screen in a little while. So let's begin just by studying the 9th Perek. Let's study this story together. It is really amazing. Okay, so we're Perek Tes, Pasuk Aleph, right from the get-go. Vayihi kishmoa kol hamlachim asher beiver hayarden baharu bashvila b'chol chof hayam hagadol amol havanon hachiti ha'amori ha'knini v'haprizi ha'chivi v'ayevusi. The nations, the city-states, whatever you want to call them, the powerful forces within the land of Israel heard what was happening, which means they heard about Yehoshua's army crossing into Israel. They heard about the victory in Yericho, which was remarkable. They heard about the victory in Ai, which took 2 stages, but was equally as successful. They heard everything that was going on, and they realized that we have someone that we need to contend with. Right? It's not the case that they're just going to waltz into Israel and conquer it without any kind of response. And they decided that they needed to gather together to unify in a way that they have never unified before, to respond, in one accord or in one voice. The exception to the rule is the people of Givon. They also heard the same thing, but obviously we're repeating it because they responded to what they heard a little bit differently. Vayasu gam hema ve'orma, and they acted with Orma. Orma is, okay, and your first association with that term is? What's that? What'd you say? Oh, okay, great. The Nachash reminds us all the way back to the first story. What else does it remind you of? Somebody say something else? Lavan, Arma, beautiful. Also, trickery. Anyone else? Okay, so Arma is a very important term in the Tanakh. Chazal are curious about Vayasu gam hema be'arma. They also act. Who else did? So it means maybe there was 2 acts of Arma. The first was the unity of the enemies of Israel, and the second was them, or maybe it refers to something else. We'll see. Vayalchu vayitstaru. So they went and they disguised themselves. Vaychu sakim balim lachamorihem v'nodos yain balim u'mevukaim u'mitzorarim. They took worn sacks for their donkeys and cracked and split wine skins. They dressed themselves up as if they had come on a long journey. They disguised themselves. Unalos balos u'metulaos baraglehem uslamos balos alehem v'chalechem seidam yavesh haya nikudim. And they took a worn clothing and patched shoes. All the bread of their provisions was dry and toasted. They showed up everything on them. They gave off the impression that they had barely made it, traveling forever. The great irony that someone would arrive in Israel to meet the Jews with over toasted bread. It should not be lost on any of us. Okay, that's a familiar shared national memory. Vayalchu el Yehoshua la machaneh ha-Gilgal, and the people of Givon approached Yehoshua, who was camped out in Gilgal. Vayomru elav, and they said to him, most interesting expression, Ve'el ish Yisrael. And what does that mean? Art Scroll translation is Ish Yisrael means and to the Jewish people. When else do we have a term like that? Ish Yisrael, B'nai Yisrael. Ish Yisrael, so maybe they're talking to someone individually, maybe they're talking person to person, which is also a possibility here, because we'll see it's important. They are talking to Yehoshua, because there's no question about it, he's the man in charge, but they're also talking to individuals or to the people. We're coming from a very, very, very distant place, and we're here to make a covenant with you. Now, of course, they're not coming from a distant place. They're coming from 10 miles north. They live just north of Yerushalayim, but that's what they do. Vayomer Ish Yisrael El Hachivi. So now the people, who's supposed to respond to them? The leader is supposed to respond. So some individual or the people responded, and now they're considered to be the Givonim that the Navi tells us are a subset of the Chivi. So we know that they are 7 nations, which is very important. Ulai b'kirbiyat Yoshev. You say you're from a very far away place, but maybe you live here. How do we know? How could we possibly make a covenant with you? Keep that in mind. They say, maybe you're locals, and if you're locals, there's no way that we can make peace with you. Vayomer el Yehoshua. So when they were challenged, they said, now they turn to the leader. Avadecha anachnu, we are humble servants. Vayomer alehem Yehoshua, mi atemu me'ayin tavo. So Yehoshua says, again, repeating the same question that the people have, who are you, and from where do you come? Vayomer elav, me'eretz rechokam me'od ba'u avadecha. Your servants come from a very distant land, l'shem Hashem Elokecha, in order to serve Hashem. Hishamanu shamo v'yiskol asher asa b'Mitzrayim. Because we've heard about him with a capital H, we've heard about Hashem, and we've heard about all the amazing things that he did in Egypt. V'yiskol asher asa l'shnei malchei ha'amori asher be'evar yardim l'sichon melech Heshbon u'la'og melech habashan asher ba'asharos. We also heard about the victories that you won with Hashem's help on the far side of the Jordan right before you entered the land. They're saying everything you're supposed to say when you meet Yehoshua. The first thing they say is, we're not from here. And the second reason is, we're so honored to meet you and to serve you that we came from a great distance to meet you. I don't think that this is an insignificant piece of the story. They're saying exactly what Jews have always hoped someone would say to us. And every once in a while, a non-Jew will meet us, a non-Jewish leader will meet us, and they'll say exactly what we've always been hoping. So, you're such a small people. It's amazing how much you've accomplished. You've always been on the right side of history, and your God is amazing. What's that? Exactly. Yeah, right. A lot of, and obviously, I'm just here because who wouldn't follow the Jews, right? This feels very Yisro-like. The only difference is he's not talking to his son-in-law, right? There's no family here. And they said, we are representatives of a larger group of people from a faraway land. So our elders and the people who live in the citizens of our land, again, this is an unidentified place. They're not saying where they come from. They said, go on our behalf and meet these Jews. And on behalf of all the citizens, you should say, and we're all meaning on behalf of our fellow citizens. We are here to say on their behalf, we will like to be your servants. We would like to have a covenant with you. We baked fresh bread before we left for our journey to come and meet you. And now look at it. I mean, it was such a difficult journey for us to take. All the supplies that we brought with us are wearing away. Ve'elu nodos hagayin asher milenu chadashim hinei hispakau, and we bought these wine jugs so we would have what to drink on the way, and you can see that they're worn out. The Jews traveled 40 years in the Midbar, and Moshe says, don't forget, you never had to go clothes shopping. Your clothing never worn out. Your shoes never got holes in them. Everything was fine. They said, look at us. We're here, and the bread is dried out, and the wine flasks have holes in them, and the clothes are worn. Like Huhan Hashem mitzedan, the aspi Hashem lo sha'alu. So the men accepted something from them, fell for their trap, and they did not ask Hashem. So until this moment, we're talking about Ish Yisrael. There's somebody or a group of citizens of the Jewish people listening to this story, and they're completely captivated by it. And they said, wow, you guys are great. We're so happy you're here. And the only mistake they made is they didn't ask if that was the right decision or the wrong decision. And more importantly, if Yehoshua is a partner in this conversation and the people, so the people are speaking, obviously, before Yehoshua. So that itself is challenging. Remember that when we studied last week in Sefer Bamidbar, when Moshe asks that there be a smooth succession plan after he passes away, so Hashem tells him, I have a great plan for you. Elazar will succeed Aharon, Yehoshua will succeed you, and anytime Yehoshua is not sure what to do, the people need to make a decision, Yehoshua will go to Elazar, and he's got the Urim Tumim, and the Urim Tumim will tell you what to do. Right? Moshe says that's the system we need because we don't want the citizens of Israel to be like a flock of sheep without a shepherd. So here you have a flock of sheep with a shepherd, but they're not even asking. And the Navi goes out of its way to tell you that they made this, they shook hands without even asking the opinion of. So here in the Art Scroll translation, it's translating it as their deception, right? Whoever else has the English along with me. The other possibility is they took the food, right? Say daladara, right? In other words, which is probably informal gesture of accepting the truce, right? In other words, they broke bread with either. So some of the Mefarshim say, in addition to all the junky rations that they said, look, our wine bottles, they also came with gifts, and the gifts were first class. Those were vacuum sealed, good quality gifts on frozen ice. That was a real possibility. Or the tzeda here is latsud, means to trap. They fell for it. It's one or the other. Exactly. So it's one or the other, or maybe both. Okay. Vayas. So who are they? I don't know. I'm reading along with you. It's mysterious, right? It should be mysterious. We haven't met them yet in 9 chapters of Yehoshua. It's not like there's Joshua and the people. This is a new expression. So the people, fall for the trap, take from the goods without asking Hashem. And then, Pasuk Tezva, verse 15, Vayas lahem Yehoshua shalom, Vayichros lahem bris l'chayosam. Yehoshua made peace with them, and he made a bris with them to let them live. Vayishavu lahem nisiyei ha'ida. And then they took an oath with the leaders. So who are the Ish Yisrael? By process of elimination, they are not the leaders. They are not Yehoshua, and they are not nisiyei ha'ida. This is the Navi wants you to know that this covenant took place in the exact opposite manner that it should have happened. If we have a divinely ordained leadership structure, so then peace treaties should be made top down. This partnership with the Givonim, who, by the way, have still not been identified and where they're from, etc., is made bottom up. First by Ish Yisrael, and then by Yehoshua, and then it's confirmed by the Nisiyei Ha'ida. Vayihi miksei shaloshet yamim. This is Pasuk Tes Zayin, verse 16. And it happened. This is very funny biblical language for those who appreciate the word Vayihi, which I know appears everywhere. And so it was 3 days later. Acharei asher karsu lahem bris, after the covenant was official. Vayishmeu, and they heard, they is Ish Yisrael, Nesiei Hoida, Yehoshua, they. Now all of a sudden it's they. Ki krovim heim elav. It feels like Ish Yisrael because elav is in the singular. It's the Ish Yisrael heard that they are neighbors. Ubekirbo heim yoshvim. Every instinct that they said themselves, how do we not know that you guys are from the next town? You can't check their social media profile. And lo and behold, 3 days later, it's obvious that they got duped, that these people from right up the street. Yeah. Yeah, so it's a great question. It's obviously the question that the Navi wants you to feel, right? It's written in that way. Every time the people do, Yehoshua is always second here, right? Which is not the kind of character we would expect. And then the simple answer would be because the people want him to, right? Meaning everybody's shaking on it. What's he supposed to say, right? They're criminals. Get them out of here. Everybody looked good. It looked like a good deal, but it obviously was not. Yeah, the people are building an ego, and what do you expect him to do? So I mean, this may be less extreme than that, but it's not at the same time. It's the same kind of structure. So the Jews, they go up the street 3 days later. And they come to this place, and they find out that the representatives who they met are not a representative from faraway people, but they're literally the representatives from the next towns that probably Yehoshua and his army would have crushed in war, which is very important. They're not from really far away. They're within 3 days' walk, which means they're right on course for confrontation. So they walk right up to this town. They see it's a town of Givonim. They realize that they signed a peace treaty with the enemy. V'lo hikum b'nei Yisrael. As I mentioned in week 1, when Joshua's people make treaties, they always keep them. When they make promises, they always fulfill them, even to their detriment. V'lo hikum b'nei Yisrael. So the Navi says that the soldiers of Israel did not attack them. Ki nishba'u lahem nesiei hoida b'Hashem Elokei Yisrael, because they swore by God's name in a treaty with them. Vayilonu chol ha'edah al hanisiim. This is the best line of the whole story. So they said, well, we can't fight with them because we promised that we wouldn't. And now everybody's a military expert. Vayilonu kol ha'edah nisim. Everybody. Who? I thought everybody was involved. Now we have kol ha'edah. Kol ha'edah is reminiscent of the story of the Meraglim, right? The Meraglim come back with a terrible report, and the entire Edah comes to Moshe and says, you screwed up big time. We can't win this war. The exact same thing happening here. Vayilonu kol ha'edah al nesiim. And it's the Nesiim's fault, not the Ish Yisrael, not Yehoshua's fault, because the Nesiim performed some kind of official treaty or covenant, B'Shem Hashem. Well, it was B'Shem Hashem. It wasn't with God's advice, right? God's name in vain, right? It's a great, that's an excellent point. Vayomru kol ha'nesiim al kol ha'edah. So now we're talking in pejoratives, alls, right? Kol ha'nesiim, kol ha'edah. Now everybody's talking at the same time. Kol ha'nesiim al kol ha'edah. Anachnu nishbanu lahem b'Hashem Elokei Yisrael. V'ata lo nuchal l'ngo b'hem. What do you want me to do? I signed a covenant. I can't go back on it. This is exactly what we're going to spend the rest of the night talking about. What can we do? Well, so it's not binding, right? It shouldn't be binding, right? So that's exactly what we're going to talk about. That's why we're here tonight. That's very important. Okay, but that's what they said. And it's very clear that the oath that they took is a formal and binding one. And even after they find out that they signed this treaty under a false premise with people who they thought were from another place, then to see him say, I'm sorry, like that's not how it works. It's so it shall be written, so it shall be done. Zos na'aseh lahem v'hachayosam. This is what we should do to them. We have to support them, let them live. V'lo yeh aleinu ketzef al hashvu asher nishbanu lahem. There should be no wrath against us because of the oath that we had taken to them. What's the ketzef? What? War with? So the other tribes are going to go to war with them anyway, because nobody else is participating. Who's going to be angry at them if they break this deal? So it feels like divine, right? Meaning we have a religious responsibility. Ketzef in the Chumash is usually God getting angry at us, right? Biblical, divine theory. That God was angry at them just a few minutes ago. That's correct. Vayomer aleim hanesiim yichyu. So the Nesiim said, don't worry, guys. Let them live. The role as newfound members of our nation, we'll try and identify what their status is a little bit later, was that there'll be wood choppers and water carriers for the entire people. Kasher dibru lahem hanesiim. So they'll have some kind of low-ranking responsibilities within the people, exactly as the Nesiim had told them. So it sounds like that this was the impression, maybe that was part of the agreement that they had made, that there were certain jobs that they could be eligible for if they joined. Are they avadim? Almost like a form of avdus, lower class citizen for sure, limited professional opportunity. And then, vayikra lahem Yehoshua, vayidaber alehem lemor. Again, now this whole thing happens again, another round of conversation without Yehoshua's participation. The Ada, Kol Ha'eda is talking, Kol HaNesiim are talking, the Givonim are talking, and then a conversation with Yehoshua. Vayikra lahem Yehoshua, vayidaber alehem lemor. So Yehoshua calls the Givonim and he says, let's talk. And he says, Lama rimisem osanu lemor. So whoever said Orma reminds him of Lavan, right? Lama rimisani, right? That's the kind of thing he does. Lama rimisem osanu lemor. Why did you trick us? Rechokim anachnu mikem me'od ve'atem b'kirbeinu yoshvim. You said you come from a faraway place, but you're really locals. I mean, it seems like, Yehoshua, this conversation already happened yesterday, so it feels a little repetitive. Ve'ata arurim atem. You should be cursed. V'lo yikares mikem eved v'chotvei tzim v'shoav yimayim lebeis Elohai. And no one will cease from among your people to be water carriers, to be wood choppers, lebeis Elokai. So now Yehoshua seems to be, if you read it carefully, adjusting the terms. So first, they're just water carriers and wood choppers. Now Yehoshua refers to them as avadim. Number two is that it seems like the Nesiim said that they'll serve as chotvei etzim v'shoavei mayim l'chol ha'eda, that they will serve the people. Yehoshua says that they will be they'll work for the Mishkan. They'll work for the temple specifically. So he says, you're cursed, and that's your limitation. Pasuk Chaf Dalet. Vayanu es Yehoshua vayomru. And they responded to Yehoshua and they said, Ki huged hugad la'avadecha es asher tziva Hashem elokecha es Moshe avdo. Listen, they say to now they're finally defending themselves. They say, Huged hugad la'avadecha. It was told to us what Hashem commanded Moshe. L'seis lachem es kol haaretz ulashmid es kol yoshvei haaretz mipneichem. Not only we mentioned that we heard about Kriyas Yamsuf, we mentioned we heard about this, we mentioned we heard about that. We also would like to clarify that your teacher, your predecessor, Moshe Rabbeinu, was told to wipe out all the inhabitants, which includes us. Vaniram me'od l'nafshosenu mipneichem. So we were scared for our survival, and that's why we did what we did. So now I feel like a little bit more empathy in this conversation, that they, what was the alternative? And we'll think about that, what the alternative was. Even though Yehoshua has already cursed them, they humbly say, we're in your hands. Whatever you think should happen to us will happen to us. And if it means that we'll be a class of slaves, and if it means that we will, have to work as water carriers, as wood choppers, so be it. Vayaslehem came. This is what he did for them. Vayatzel osam miyad b'nei Yisrael below Haragum, and he rescued them from the hands of the Jewish people, and they did not kill them. So does Yehoshua get the credit for saving them from the Nesiim, the Kol Ha'eda, the mob? It sounds like they had already kind of come to terms anyway, but with Yehoshua's stamp of approval, now they're officially going to get a pass. The covenant will be binding with limitations or with a curse on top of it, but fundamentally they're approved. On that day, Yehoshua made it official that they would be wood choppers for Shoavei Mayim La'ida, ulemizbach Hashem, specifically for the Mizbeach, for the Mishkan, Arayom Hazeh, El HaMakom Asher Yivchar. Not only now, wherever the Mishkan happens to be, but eventually, wherever the Beis Hamikdash will be, the Givonim will play that role. They'll have to move along with it and settle with it. Let's keep going into Perek Yud because it's important. Vayikishmo Adoni Tzedek Melech Yerushalayim Kilachad Yoshua Sa'ai Vayacharima Kasher Asay Yericho L'Malka Kina Sala'ayu L'Malka V'chi Hishlimu Yoshvei Givon Es Yisrael Vayiu B'Kirbam. So let's just translate the end of that pasuk. One of the things that Adoni Tzedek, the king of Yerushalayim, heard again. Yerushalayim is also a neighboring city to where they are at this point. Hishlimu Yoshvei Givon Es Yisrael. What does that expression mean? Hishlimu. Yeah, right? It means both shalom, that there's peace between them, but also that they have now been incorporated into the larger Israel. So what is the status of the Givonim? They're Avadim, but they're Jewish Avadim. They're non-Jews, but they have solid peace terms with them. That's quite the dramatic. Vayihu b'kirbam. Now, this just happened, and now the Givonim are part of the Jews. That's how quickly they have entered the fold. Vayiru ma'od. And they, meaning the people of Yerushalayim, were scared. The people of Givon, the city of Givon, this is a huge loss. Remember that at the beginning of Perek Test, everybody's getting together to fight the Jews in one group. So without having Givon, they're much weaker. It's also obviously shocking to them that while they're all getting together, Conference of Presidents, to team up against the Jews, obviously we're not appreciating the fact that the people of Givon were very capable fighters. They had great infrastructure and well-built cities, and they were a large number of people. They were more impressive than Ai. So this is a big loss for them, both militarily, politically, and psychologically. Vayishlach Adoni Tzedek Melech Yerushalayim El Hoham Melech Hebron Ve'el Pira Melech Yarmus Ve'el Yafia Melech Lachish Ve'el Tvir Melech Eglon Nemor. And he sends a message to all the other kings of the area. Alu Elai Ve'izruni V'nakeres Givon. So let's go sack the city of Givon. Ki Yishlimas Yoshua V'Espnei Yisrael, because they've made a peace treaty with the enemy. Vayasvu Vayalu Chameshes Valcheho Amori Melech Yerushalayim Melech Hebron Melech Yarmus Melech Lachish Melech Eglon. The 5 cities come together, Vayachanu al Givon Vayilachamu aleha, and they siege the city and they attack it. Vayishluchu anshe Givon Yehoshua al hamachaneh al Gilgal alemor. So now, first of all, just to point out, it sounds like from the text that the people of Givon are defending themselves okay, meaning things are stable. They're just under siege, and they send a message to Yehoshua in Gilgal, and they say, Al teref yodecha me'avadecha. Alei elenu mehira v'hoshi alanu v'azreinu ki nikbetzu elenu kol malchei ha'amori yoshvei ha'ar. Imagine this. And they say, 3 days ago we made a peace treaty. Now the 5 most powerful armies in the region have all attacked us for signing it. So you have to come to our rescue. What do we do? Listen, we made a peace treaty with you, but really we didn't make a peace treaty with you. We didn't even know who you were at the time. And you're only Avadim. It's not our job to take care of you. That's not the way Sefer Yehoshua works, which is amazing. Vayal Yehoshua min Gilgal hu v'chol am milchama imo v'chol gibor yachal. They just grab their weapons and they go, because after all, they have a treaty between them. It's their job. Vayomer Hashem Yehoshua al tiramehem. And now God appears for the first time in this story, who has had no role, whose opinion was not asked at any point in time, in this entire disaster of a political situation. And Hashem appears to Yehoshua, and he seems to endorse the whole thing. Al tiramehem, don't be afraid. It's going to go great. Vayavo aleim Yehoshua pitom kol halayla alam min hagilgal vayumam Hashem lifnei Yisrael vayakim makah gedolah begivon vayirdefaim derech malei beis charon vayakim al azekah ve'ad Makeda. The Jews, I mean, I don't think in a million years the other armies would have thought that the Jews were going to come to the rescue of the Givonim, but they did. They caught them by surprise, and they defeated them and chased them away. And as they were fleeing from the Jews, a miracle, that stones were cast upon them, large stones from the heavens, all the way while they were running to this place of Azekah. More of the fleeing soldiers died from the miracle than the Jews had killed by sword. So they were successful initially in the first round of battle, and then as they chased the fleeing soldiers, Hashem kind of finished off the rest. And then, much like last week's Parsha, where Moshe has a great victory and then he sings, Az Yidaber Yehoshua LaHashem b'yom Tesa Hashem es Amori lifnei b'nei Yisrael v'yomer l'nei Yisrael Shemesh b'givon dom, which we talked about a little bit yesterday. V'yareach b'emek ayalon. Hashem showed up and he stopped the sun for us, performed miracles. V'yidom Hashemesh v'yareach hamad ad yikom goy oyevav halo iksuv al sefer harayashar v'yamod Hashemesh b'chasi hashemayim v'lo'atz lavo kiyom tamim. V'lo haya kayom ahu lefanav ve'acharav l'shmo Hashem b'kol ish ki Hashem nilcham Yisrael. There was never such an amazing day like this one when Hashem listened to the voices of his people, to the voices of man, and Hashem fought for Israel. So what started out as a very bad political mistake ends up ultimately becoming a tremendous military victory, because they have a partnership with Givon, which means they don't have to defeat the Givonim, which is great. So then the Givonim are sitting ducks. They get attacked by 5 of the local armies. The Jews are able to swoop in, and they have a great military victory. It's a miraculous victory. Hashem participates along the way, and Yehoshua sings, and everything is good to go. And now the Givonim are whatever the Givonim are. And if we have time, we'll talk about it later. And if not, you can take the sheet with you, and you can read about them throughout the Navi. You read about them in Sefer Shmuel. They come up over and over again. The Givonim are still members of the Jewish people. They actually have the sympathy of David HaMelech in one of the disputes between David and Shaul, which is important for another time. But they're very much part of the Jewish people for the foreseeable future. So what's the big question here? Yeah. Great. So why wouldn't there be? The working assumption should be that the Givonim were pagan. So the big question in this story is, why did the Givonim do what they did? Right? Why did the Givonim disguise themselves as being foreigners in order to make peace with Israel? So first of all, it's a crazy strategy because it turns out it only lasts for 72 hours, right? And it depends on the integrity of the person you make this bris with. You have to know that these newcomers will stand by the covenant, even though it's made on false premise. So question number one is, why do they have to make a covenant like this one? Is it necessary? Maybe it wasn't necessary. But is it necessary? That's number one. And number two is, was it actually binding? And that's tricky business. So here's how this is how the story goes. If you take a look in Sefer Devarim, and you turn back to Perek Taf. Okay, so if you have a Tanakh, you'll be okay. If not, you'll have to trust me. Okay, it's Devarim chapter 20, Pasuk Yud, verse 10. Okay. After discussing what the general rules of war are in Parshas Shoftim, the Torah tells us, Moshe Rabbeinu tells the Jewish people, some of the rules of engagement. Okay, this is Devarim 20:10. In Parsha Shoftim, it's the beginning of the 7th Aliyah in Parsha Shoftim. Hisikra el ir lihilachem aleha, v'karasa eleha lishalom. The first thing you do is you offer peace. V'hayim shalom tancha upaschala. And if they respond in peace, and it opens for you, so then all of the people of that place will be in tribute to you, and they will be your servants. And if they refuse and they want to go to war with you, so then you'll besiege the city. So then you'll go to battle. Hashem will defeat the enemy for you, and all of the males will be killed. All of the women and the children and the cattle and the property and the cities will all be spoils of war for you. And you will get to keep the spoils of war that Hashem has given you. So you shall do to all of the cities that are very distant to you, which are not from the cities of these peoples. Who are the cities of these peoples? The 7 nations in Eretz Yisrael already. From the people who live there already, nobody shall survive, and no spoil shall be taken, which we already saw in Sefer Yehoshua 2 weeks ago. You should utterly destroy them. You have to wipe them out exactly as Hashem told you, and then Yonina, to your point, because they will not teach you, therefore they will not teach you to act according to their abominations and perform for their gods. So it sounds like what the Torah is telling us is that you can't make peace with the nations that are already living there, because making peace with the nations that are already living there is going to be a disaster. Now, it's going to be a religious failure, because we know that the Avodah Zarah, the pagan culture, is going to be so tempting that you're not going to be able to withstand the temptation. We know this is true because Moshe warns the people constantly in Sefer Devarim. I'm not going into my favorite topics. I'm not going into Eretz Yisrael with you, and I wish I could be there with you, because there's going to be all sorts of temptations, and I really don't want you to fail with them. You should wipe everybody out so that there's no temptation left. More importantly, anyone who's a student of Jewish history beyond Sefer Yehoshua knows that Yehoshua does not wipe out all of the peoples. And what happens next? The people get tempted by all of the pagan temptations of the time, and they fail time and time again. So this is exactly what happens in future generations. So it sounds like, as a general operating principle, peace is a good thing. But specifically when it comes to living side by side with the 7 nations, of course, the Givonim are part of the Chivi, so they're part of it. So it sounds like it's problematic. So is that the case? Meaning, are we reading the Psukim in Devarim correctly so that no peace treaty of any kind can be made, or not? This is both a practical question for understanding the circumstances of our story, and also a great philosophical question, an ethical question about the conquering of Eretz Yisrael. Was it absolutely necessary that they would kill all of the inhabitants of the land? Or was there any kind of option by which there could be some kind of peace or some kind of alternative to violence in order to come back to the land that was given to our forefathers? This is subject to a big-time debate among the Rishonim, and it is based on a tradition that appears in the Medrash and in the Gemara in a number of places. So I gave it to you from the Rambam in Hilchos Malachim, as well as from the Ramban here in Parshas Shoftim, and a couple of other sources as well. So let me share on the screen for those who are with us remotely. Okay, so let's take a look. This is just a translation of the Rambam in the 6th parak of Hilchos Malachim from Sefaria in the English. How do we know that these commandments are only referring to those who did not accept a peaceful settlement? We're in the middle here of parak Vav. The Rambam says anybody who accepts peace, there's always peace on the table. That's it, always. So how do we know that that's true? Because Yehoshua said there was no city which accepted a peaceful settlement with the children of Israel except the Chivis who lived in Givon. All the rest they conquered in battle. So you see in parak Yud Aleph that it seems like peace is always on the table. This was inspired by God, who strengthened their hearts to engage in battle against Israel so that they would be destroyed. From these statements, we can infer that a peaceful settlement was offered, but they did not accept it. Now, if peace was offered by Yehoshua to all of the peoples who lived in Israel, and they didn't accept it, I would have loved to see that peace offering in the text of this story. It does not appear in Sefer Yehoshua, but this is the tradition in the English version, I underlined it for you, that appears in Chazal. Yehoshua sent 3 letters to the Canaanites before entering the promised land. This is that tradition. The Rambam here is just quoting. At first, he sent them, whoever desires to flee should flee. They sent an email to everybody living in Eretz Yisrael, and they said, we're coming back to take a land that belongs to us. You should go. Afterwards, they sent a second message, meaning, I guess, for anybody who didn't leave, who said no thank you, whoever desires to accept a peaceful settlement shall make peace. And then he sent again, whoever desires war should do battle. That's the tradition. So then ask the Rambam the question that everybody asks. This is the most popular question among the Rishonim. If so, why do the inhabitants of Givon employ a ruse? In other words, they should have just made peace if peace was on the table. So the Rambam's suggestion is, and other Rishonim have this suggestion as well, because it sounds like it's against it, right? Yes, it does. It does sound like this is against the simple reading of what appears in Parsha Shoftim, but the Rambam assumes that that's not the case. By the way, Rashi in Parsha Shoftim, and I think Rashi here in Sefer Yehoshua disagrees with this reading, and he reads the text in Parsha Shoftim very simply, which means there is no peace on the table for the 7 nations, which is why they have to take extreme measures, because otherwise there won't be an option. So the Rambam says, because originally, when he sent the message to them as part of all the Canaanite nations, they did not accept it. They weren't aware of the laws of Israel, and they thought that they would never be offered a peaceful settlement again. So why was the matter difficult for the prince of Israel to accept, to the point that they desired to slay the Gibeonites by sword, were not for the oath that they had taken? Because they made a covenant with them, as Devarim says, Parak Zayin, don't make a covenant with them. Rather, the laws of governing their status would have prescribed that they be subjugated as servants. And so the Rambam concludes by saying, since the oath was given to them under false pretenses, it would have been just to slay them for misleading them, were not for the dishonor of God's name, which would have been caused. So number 1 was peace on the table. It should have been on the table. Why was there no option for peace for the Givonim? Because in the first offering of peace, which does not appear in the text of Sefer Yehoshua, they, like everybody else, said, thanks for the warning, we'll see you when you get here. And nobody was intending to pick up and leave just because Yehoshua and the Jewish people were arriving. Remember, the irony is, of course, that when the Givonim present as foreigners, so they know so much about the Jews. Remember, they say, we heard all these things about you and all the wars you won. It's if there was some kind of message sent, they certainly knew that there was one. And this is the argument that they made. So the Rambam says, yeah, there was an offering of peace. They turned it down and they missed their boat. And then they figured, they'll get to Yericho and the people of Jericho will shoo these people away. And then that's it. And then they won battle number 1 and they won battle number 2. And Givon didn't want to be victory number 3. So they changed their mind, but there was no chance to make peace. It was too late. They missed their window. So they came up with this ruse. And then the Rambam says, but it's not binding. You're asking the second question. It's not binding because it was made under false pretenses. So the Rambam says it would have been a chil Hashem. So now, what is the Rambam referring to here? This is not his own suggestion. This is the suggestion of the Gemara. So if you turn your handout over to the second side, I will show you what he's referring to. The Gemara in Gittin on Daf Mem Vav Amud Aleph, 46a. Okay, the Gemara has a principle. In the name of Rabbi Yehuda and the Mishnah, Rabbi Yehuda has a rule in the bold, Kol neder sheyadu bo rabim lo yachzir. The rule is that if you make a neder and the people know about it, it can't be undone. So if I make a personal neder, if I take a personal oath, so I could go to the rabbis on Erev Rosh Hashanah, or go before the court and do a little Hataras Nedarim, and that's it, and it disappears. But a public neder can't be undone. So the Gemara says, my time at Rabbi Yehuda, where does Rabbi Yehuda know this rule from? That if you make a neder in public, it can't be undone. Because the pasuk says, "V'lo yikom b'nei Yisrael ki nishbu lahem nesiyei ha'edah." Because we learn it from the story of Givon, meaning the mechanism by which the oath was taken was not personal or private, but it was national or public. And since the oath was taken by the Nesiyei Ha'edah on behalf of the people representing all of Givon and all of Israel, once it was made, there's no going back. So the same is true, says Rabbi Yehuda, for any neder that a person makes in public. If you make it in public, there's no going back. So the Gemara says, the Chachamim, Hasa Michal Ashvu Alayu Klal, Kevan Tamar Lehu Me'eretz Rechoka Banu V'lo Ba'u Lo Chai L'Shvu Alei Klal. They said, we're making an oath with the people that come from a faraway land. They're not from a faraway land. The oath is not binding. V'hai Delo Katlinu. So then, if that's correct and it wasn't binding, so then they should have killed all the people of Givon. Mishum Kedushas Hashem. Kiddush Hashem. What's the Kiddush Hashem? Everybody will say that the Jews made a peace treaty with these people and then they stabbed them in the back. And yeah, you'll tell them, UNRWA is funded by Palestinian terrorists. You'll do all your hasbara, and there's no coming back from it, right? So the Gemara here is actually, it's just like a kind of casual line, but a very important machlokus. According to the first opinion in the Gemara, according to Rabbi Yehuda, the neder was binding even though it was made under false pretenses. And according to the Chachamim, of course it wasn't binding, but they kept to it anyway. I'm not sure which of those is a better reading of Sefer Yehoshua. I think that's an interesting question. Is it possible that the Jewish people really got duped and they felt, whatever you want to say, legally, religiously, it wasn't binding at all, and they still held to it? Or is it more convenient for us to say that in some kind of technical sense, they felt like they really made a covenant, they couldn't break it? I'm not sure which of those readings is the more impressive one. But either way, the Rambam takes the position very clearly that the Shavua was not binding at all, and they stuck to it anyway because it was a Kiddush Hashem.
Good enough for me. Fine here. It doesn't sound like they did much investigating.
Right. So it's a great point. So for those who are also listening online, so the argument is maybe it is the onus of investigating the details falls on the person making the covenant. So since they chose to not do their due diligence in making the treaty, maybe they are bound by it. There certainly was researchable facts. They could have taken their time before they made the oath, and they didn't do it. So why, by the way, why did they fall for this trap? I mean, it looks right. So saying if you believe that fundamentally, right, that there's a value or an opportunity there to make peace. So, I mean, this is the only peace they make in the entire Sefer Yehoshua. So if you look at the Me'am Loe's commentary, I actually photocopied a small section of it for you. He says there's 4 reasons why the Jews made this bris with the Givonim. You see it in the bold section, okay? Hatam ha'echad, shera sheroshei hatzava nasnu imon b'divreihem, v'heim rotzim lichros imam shalom. Meaning that his question is specifically Yehoshua, why Yehoshua agreed to the terms. So number one is he saw that everybody else was excited by it. I would say Aleph is peer pressure. Everybody else seems to think this is a good idea. He's not going to be the only cynic in the room. Number two, Sheshama mipiem dvarim shenemru toch hachna'a v'hakara b'Hashem yisbarach she'asanisim v'niflos gedolim l'Yisrael. It's a combination, 2A and 2B. Number one, they're very humble, right? Yehoshua, who is the ultimate Eved, here's somebody else saying that we will serve you as Avadim, and he understands that the language is humble. And number two, there's also a religious component, right? That they're talking about God in the right way. Number three, Shehaya Yoshua Savor Shem Yikabel Hagivonim Ya'asu Gerim Amitiyim Be'emunah Shlema. That if they're converting, why not? What is Yeshua's perspective on conversion in this story? We're so worried about the influence that they will have negatively on us that we never entertain the possibility that we might have a positive influence on them. This is an interesting, Mamlois is an interesting commentary. This in particular is an interesting line because what happens? The people say, great, so you lied to us. We're stuck with the covenant anyway. Now you work for us. And that's like the better. And Yehoshua says, no, good deal. So Yehoshua says, you can work at the Beis HaMikdash, right? Why does he want them at the Beis HaMikdash? You see, that's why he wants them at the Beis HaMikdash. Because if you're going to, what is happening here? Are they converting to Judaism? Or are we talking about Sheva Mitzvos B'nai Noach, right? That the nations that live in the land of Israel follow these pagan practices, which are the antithesis of Sheva Mitzvos B'nai Noach. If you're willing to follow the 7 Noachide laws, we can be peaceful neighbors. Or are we talking about being mashlim klal Yisrael? They're becoming part of the people. So he says, you'll move in, you'll have morning seder in the mornings, and then afternoons you'll do avodas hakodesh in the Beis HaMikdash. And ultimately we'll look back at history and say this was the right decision. Yeah, Yaakov. That's a great point. He's not opposed, right? Right. It's important that should the treaty, the promise made to Rachav and to spare her family is also a very important piece of this halachic discussion. Was that mutter or not? And even more so if they actually marry each other. It's a great point. Yeah. Yes.
That actually is the common thread between the story and this story, which explains the fact that there are non-Jews in the.
Right. So saying some of the non-Jews that will remain in Israel are because Yehoshua in his generation doesn't even come close to fighting battles with them. They're just on the far outskirts or too far north or whatever the case may be. So certainly it's not like they finished the job from top to bottom. That's number one. But number two, you're 100% right. There's still non-Jews left, and this is one of those stories of how it came to be. But Givonim always have a very particular identity or class structure because they're not Jews and they're not non-Jews. They're kind of somewhere in between. Right? Are they gay or are they not? And then he says reason number 4, Shebevadai kavod gadol yeh Yisrael sheyisparsim hadavar shemikotze eretz umos Yisrael lechro shalom v'leflor mehem mas uvavada yeh b'zeh kiddush Hashem b'rabim. In the original ruse, they said we're coming here to join you from faraway lands, which means now the word is out that people love us and they respect us and everything that we accomplished until this point in Jewish history. Meaning, if you think about it, I mean, maybe this is the story of Jewish history, but it's kind of remarkable. I mean, HaKadosh Baruch Hu appears in Mitzrayim and he performs these amazing miracles. And then he appears at the top of Har Sinai and he gives us the Torah. I mean, we're so convinced, right? We were talking with Tim and Chalmarav yesterday. To the Jews, it's so obvious, all these years of living under Moshe Rabbeinu's tutelage, that God's the real deal. And you would think that there's somebody out there that appreciates this. We only meet one person ever who says, by the way, love your story. That's Yisro, right? And he's married in. You would think it's more compelling. You would think people want to join us. And then people show up and that's what they say. Like I mentioned before, they're saying exactly what you want them to say, which is your story's amazing, your narrative is great, your God is great, your religion is moral. What's it going to take for me to become a part of you? And any Jew, certainly a Jewish leader, we've been waiting to hear this now for 40 plus years. And finally, people want to join us. So that's very exciting. And it's a big trap. Yeah, Donald.
You also said what you just said. Without the Arab run, when they were attracted by something,
Mm-hmm.
they want to join in. It doesn't always work out great, but you have people who want to be part of this narrative.
Yeah, that's true. Okay, so the Arab Rav is a factor. Yeah, Sharon.
That struck me immediately when they and woodcutters, but they cushioned the blow by giving them the most exalted form. We'll be doing this for our religion. So they elevated their status, they sweetened the deal for them, and the fact that they accepted it might seem that they were knowledgeable about it. And
Mm-hmm.
the other thing that I wanted to say is they keep saying they're from foreign lands. Did they know that they were going to kill all the people that are in close proximity? Was that an attempt to save their skin?
But see, I think it certainly was an attempt to save their community. The working assumption here is that they know that they're headed to war with each other. You know, and again, it seems like they're next in line for the next battle of this story.
You read there saying that they were from a foreign land or from far away, and knowing what Hashem told them, like the Tanai to make peace with any nation is only if they're far away. So somehow they knew.
Right, that does, right, that's correct. It does seem, right. It does seem that it's the case. If you take the rabbinic tradition, that's the messaging that's getting, right? So that could be, it could also be like, meaning this trend that we find both in the Rambam, the Ramban, and elsewhere, that they were offered peace once and turned it down. So that solves for this problem of like, why did they just make peace now? Yeah, there has to be. Yeah, it could be there's some other cultural component also that they just intuit that if they're foreign partners, maybe that they'll be better accepted than if they're saying, yeah.
Start off with, we're from far away, make peace with us.
Yeah. Right, it's like some kind of shared story. And you asked about the history of the Arab Rav. I don't know. It's yeah.
I have a question. King Shaul had a bad problem with Gibonim. Didn't he execute 100 of them for very little reason? And then
Yeah,
paid.
that's right. And it was a different experience. Okay, I'm sorry. Somebody on Zoom has a question. Who's with us?
Yeah, this is Peter Kellner. Later on, King Shaul executes 100 Gibonim, and then he pays back very badly for that, especially after his death. His descendants are likely meet death sentence from David. Right. Am I correct on that? Or am
yes.
I
so in the source number 5 on the top of the handout, for those who want to read it after, we're basically out of time, but Peter's correct. It's just the site, whatever you want to call it. The source number 5 is Shmuel Bey's Paraklaf Aleph. And what happens in this story is that the Givonim live with the Kohanim in the city of Nov, which is because they work in the Mikdash. So that's ultimately the Givonim become neighbors with the Kohanim. And when Shaul wipes out the Kohanim of Nov, so the Givonim suffer that loss as well. And David plays a role in it. It's a very important story. It's a very important piece of the history of the Givonim, like I mentioned, that they remain around. So we're not going to finish the whole history of the Givonim, but this is the beginnings of that story, and and they remain. Yes. Okay, so I want to wrap up, And I would thank everybody for joining tonight, but I want to leave you with this, another question or comment? Yeah. Yeah. Great, excellent. Okay, Debbie, excellent. That's a great. So Debbie's point is, okay, so like where's Yehoshua in the story, and then where's Hashem in the story? So first of all, Hashem is in the story in his favorite way, which is he's the silent mover of the whole thing. Because the way what I would have expected in Perek Yud was the Givonim get attacked by the neighbors. And they reach out to Yehoshua and they say, hey, we made a deal 72 hours ago under false pretenses. Now you have to stand shoulder to shoulder with us in battle. And my first instinct is he would have said, no, thanks, get back to me in a week. And if you're still standing, the deal is on. Not my job to fight for you. That's what I would have expected. But Yehoshua and his people are more honest than that. Twice over. So they're holding to a covenant that's faulty. And now they're fighting for those people without any traction. Okay, that's amazing. That's number one. But then number two, what role does God play? God fights all these battles for them. If Hashem doesn't participate, they lose. That's what we know until chapter 9. So what I would have expected in this moment is like, listen, if you ask me to make a covenant, if you follow the rules and you make appropriate partnerships or peace treaties, so then you can count on me. I'm waiting for HaKadosh Baruch Hu to say, this one's on you guys. If you win, you win. And if not, not. And what happens? Yehoshua sings a Shira, and there's rocks flying from heaven. This is an incredible victory, right? Not to mention, it's 2 armies against 5 armies. I mean, this is a big-time victory for Yehoshua, which, because of its miraculous nature, is now one of their most efficient victories against one of their largest enemies. Now they've wiped out all of Central Israel in one battle because of the aligning of the stars in this unique experience. So does HaKadosh Baruch Hu approve of the circumstances? I think so. I think the answer in Perek Yud is that Hashem is okay with it. That's how I read it. I'm saying there's certainly, at the end of the day, it feels like everything works out the way that it's supposed to. That's very nice. That's a very nice reading. You can do whatever you want, and I'm here for you no matter what. Unconditional love from Yaniv Scott. Right. Okay, could be. Yeah. That's a great reading of the story. I think that's totally right. Bnei Yisrael say, listen, we took an oath b'shem Hashem. Well, what would people say? And then basically Hashem is saying the same thing. Lama Yamar Agayim, that God wasn't there for them, and God wasn't there for the Givonim. Could be. I don't think that's crazy. Right. So what's amazing. So this is an amazing piece of the story. Why is this the centerpiece of Sefer Yehoshua? That's really the question, because it is very atypical from everything else that we're used to in this story. And I think that's why it's such an important chapter. Like, whether they made other peace agreements with anybody else is hard to know, but it feels like this is a very important piece of the story. Number one, because it shows you that there is a little bit of dissension, or there's a little bit of like whatever the word is, there's maybe a lot of autonomy for the people in certain ways. Not to mention, they really should be asking HaKadosh Baruch Hu's advice, but they're kind of figuring it out on their own, which is, better or worse, but it seems to work out in this case. Okay, they don't even ask Yehoshua, right? This is one of those moments where you feel like, now we know this is not true, because we know in the Midbar with Moshe, they would have done the same thing, right? That's just, Jews are Jews. It's just the way it would be. But it is interesting. It feels like if he was more powerful of a leader, you already get the sense that even though we're talking about him a lot, there's a lot of structure around him that he's almost not needed in this moment. Yeah. At the same time, it all comes back to him. All roads lead back to Yehoshua. Right. If not for the fact that this story ends so smoothly, I would have thought, this is the beginnings of the people that would undo Israel. That's not the case with the Givonim. It's just a really interesting story. And it has these layers to it, which is, first of all, it raises the ethical question of, was it possible to make peace? If not for the story, I don't think we would have any idea that any kind of peace treaties or offerings of peace would ever have been made. Number two, it gives you a sense of the character of this generation of Jews, that they were willing to hold to this agreement, even though they didn't necessarily have to, and they felt a sense of Kiddush Hashem, meaning they saw themselves as responsible for a certain piece of Jewish history that the world was watching them as they retook Eretz Yisrael, and the way that they conducted themselves mattered. So maybe, like the Me'am Loewy says, the idea that people were inspired by their story was very compelling to them. The idea that people would see them as failing morally was something that they couldn't live with. So that also, I think, is a very important piece. But be that as it may, it's one of the most interesting chapters, or two chapters, I mean, all to say for Yehoshua, and it gives us a little bit more complexity to how things went, but ultimately it's a story that ends on a very positive note. Okay, well, thank everybody for joining as always, and have a wonderful evening.